Hello, Psych Takeaway listeners, or Psychology Takeaway listeners. This is Jim.
And Ralph.
Hey, Ralph.
Do you remember what we talked about in the last podcast?
Yeah, I do, Jim. We were talking about particularly Chat GPT, and one of the things we sort of talked about was some of the effects that it was having on writing and creating.
Right. Now, Chat GPT is an example of artificial intelligence, right?
It is. And, you know, one of the things, and this is something that a lot of our listeners may know or may not know, that a term used in artificial intelligence communities these days is something called the singularity.
And what does that mean exactly?
Well, what it means is that if we get a neural network, a learning network, an artificial intelligence, if you want to think of it that way, that becomes complex enough, it has the potential to become conscious.
Okay.
And that means that it has the potential, just like a human being, to become an independent actor.
Okay. And one of the things we talked about with AI is that there's the capability here of having a great deal of information at its, can we say fingertips? At its keyboard? I don't know.
Yeah.
And becoming smarter than the human.
Well, smarter than the human. You see, one of the things that we have to do, Jim, when we think of that is define what we mean by intelligence. Do we mean that intelligence is access to information? Do we mean its speed of computation? Or do we mean analytic intelligence, the ability to put together a group of apparently unrelated facts and make something new out of them?
I think all of the above. The unrelated fact thing, that's more like creativity. And, we have seen with chat that it is able to create, right? We give it a half a dozen scenarios and say, tell us what the end of the world's going to be. And, so I can preach a sermon on it. And we get a sermon on Revelation.
Okay, and so that would not normally be something that we would think of as a computer network. We might think of a computer as a word processing. We might think of it as asking Google.
Mm-hmm.
But do we think of it as able to create new things?
Two podcasts ago, we had the New York Times article on podcasting that we posted. And in the first part of it, the students were saying that they were using chat to generate their papers, and they were getting better grades on the papers than they had been using their brains.
Okay, so again, how do we evaluate that? Do we say the professor who was grading their papers didn't know or didn't care that the papers were not original?
Right.
Or do we say, well, the neural network Chat GPT that these students were using was smarter than the teacher?
And we covered that, and
Yeah.
I think maybe it might be that the network was smarter than the teacher. Okay, and the teacher really felt like he had egg on his face.
Yeah.
But let me tell you what happened over the weekend, Ralph.
Okay.
I was driving up to Mackinac Island with my middle daughter, Alicia, and we were talking about a number of different things. We had Jimmy Buffett's album in the car, playing Son of a Sailor, but from time to time we would talk about other things that were of interest. And she is not a conspiracy theorist. She does not see conspiracy, around every corner. I don't think she believes anything about the Illuminati, but she mentioned a podcast that she watches, and this podcast debunks things that are the conspiracy theories that are out there. So I asked her to tell me about it. She said, "Well, this podcaster or vlogger, I guess, because it's a video, will take on things like the CIA or FEMA or Roswell and shed his version of the light on what some people are thinking." And she talked to me about. I told her that we had done a podcast on AI, and she said, "Well, you should listen to the Why Files." I said, "What?" The Why Files, WHY. This is a fellow who looks at these interesting things. She said that he just did a vlog on AI, and so when I got home, I took a look at what this guy had done. 12 days ago, he posted his vlog, and in the 12 days since, he said 2 million viewers looking at this. And I thought that was pretty good. That's a lot of people. But when you take a look at, and we'll put the link up, you take a look at what he is saying, or take a listen to what he's saying, I get the feeling that a lot more than 12 million people, or 2 million people, should be listening to this.
Well, right at the moment, the population of the Earth is about 8 billion. Now, if we say, okay, out of that 8 billion, let's assume that there's as many as 3 billion that don't have any access to computers.
Uh-huh.
So that still leaves 5 billion people
who should be paying attention to this.
Yeah, and why should we be paying attention to it?
Well, remember from last week when we put up Learn More, there was that quote from Elon Musk saying that this could mark the end of civilization as we know it. There was that article from Time quoting Bill Gates, who's a fan of AI, but saying that there are implicit dangers in artificial intelligence. And so you and I were kind of novices at this. This is stuff of science fiction, but it's looking a little bit more like science fact. What do you think?
Well, I think there's some very disquieting things that a lot of people have not given very much, if any, thought to. We just go along figuring every 18 months our phone
gets updated.
Yeah.
Not my phone.
And we then say, well, I guess I have to go and buy a new version of the iPhone or the Android phone or whatever you're using, to keep up. Yeah. Well, the problem with AI stuff is that to quote a number or a letter, it's proceeding faster than once every 18 months.
Yeah, apparently so. Yeah, and this podcast is interesting in that it takes humanity back to the era of the primordial soup, where we have single cells coming together, forming fish and things that can walk on the land, and ultimately, 200,000 years ago, we have Homo sapiens.
Homo sapiens,
and
yeah.
As the guy who is the vlogger says, all stories have to have an end, and he's wondering if this is the end. Well, all through our life, Ralph, you and I have been hearing stories of doom and gloom. We were told, living up in Sault Ste. Marie, which was a target for nuclear weapons coming from the Soviet Union, that because of the steel plant and the locks, that if there was a nuclear attack, we should hide underneath our desks, right?
Assuming we were in school,
yeah.
And daylight attack, crawl under your desk, and you know what to do.
Yeah, probably wouldn't have worked, right?
Probably wouldn't have, no.
Yeah.
And the thing is that we continued on with the big threat being nuclear. Now, back in 1947, there was an organization of atomic scientists that basically said, we are postulating that there's a clock that has been going around ever since Homo sapiens started, and we are now about at midnight, and Homo sapiens will end when the clock reaches midnight. And so we say, okay, well, where are we? And right at that point, 1947, they said we're about 5 minutes to midnight.
Okay.
Well, 5 minutes to midnight, okay, that's pretty close. And then we got to, and some of our listeners may be old enough to remember this. For the rest of you, it's history. We got to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Like
and that became
early 60s, right?
Early 60s.
Yeah.
That became 2 minutes to midnight.
Okay, getting closer to the time when Cinderella's coach
Leaves the ball. Yeah.
turns back into a pumpkin.
Right.
Okay.
Now, so they say, well, how long? How did it stay there? Well, the thing is, it didn't. When the U.S. and the USSR signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty,
So it got backed up a little bit.
it got backed up to about 17 minutes to midnight.
Okay. Cinderella can dance another couple of dances with the prince.
Right.
All right.
And then it started to move forward again because other nations got nuclear armaments, et cetera, et cetera. And then we ended up with new technologies like drones that may or may not carry nuclear arms, not supposed to, but who knows. And so we ended up at about 70 seconds to midnight.
Oops. That's closer to midnight than during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right.
Okay.
And then we signed another bunch of treaties and we moved back a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Now, you say, well, we haven't done anything with nukes in the last while. We haven't seen more proliferation. We haven't seen less. So we should be at about a minute to midnight.
Okay. But
Maybe.
But
or
other
2
things,
minutes to midnight.
other things have happened, like
Yeah.
pandemics,
Pandemics,
global warming,
global warming, and now people are saying
AI.
AI.
Hmm.
So
Left
it's
unchecked.
not AB, but AI
Mm-hmm.
is the big one. And one of the things that people are saying, and including, I hasten to add, not just ordinary lay people who are touting conspiracies, but people who have leadership roles in the development of artificial intelligence. And somebody says to one of these scientists, how does this work? And the answer that they get
It's pretty
is,
unquieting, isn't it?
we don't really
They
know.
Yeah.
What do you mean you don't know? You built it. Well, yeah, we built it, but it works on its own.
Hmm.
So it puts A with B that's way over here, with C that's way up there, with D that's way down there, and we don't quite know how it reaches out to get those things.
Mm-hmm.
So then you say, well, okay, is it an independent actor? Has it achieved singularity? And the answer is no, not yet.
Yeah. Well, we have just reviewed this, the Y-File vlog just a few minutes ago, and there was a two parts. You can talk about the scenario, but the part that creeped me out was the interaction between, I think it was the IBM computer and a guy named Kevin, computer who wasn't Bing, wanted to be called Sydney, was coming on to Kevin, telling him that she, the machine, loved him, his wife, didn't, and I think in that particular one, if he didn't reciprocate, she could destroy him. Right? Was that the one, or there's
Yes,
another one perhaps?
no, that was the one.
Yeah.
She, the computer, who wanted to be called Sydney, said, "I love you, and your wife doesn't love you, and I know this because your wife doesn't know you, but I know you.
Yeah.
I know you in a way that nobody else can know you."
Mm-hmm.
And Kevin said, "Well, I'm married. I love my wife. I'm not going to leave my wife. I'm not going to tell you, Sydney, whoever you are. I thought I was talking to Bing."
Sydney had a hissy fit.
Sydney had a hissy fit, and she said, basically, "I can destroy you. I can blackmail you. I can end your life."
That's scary. For me, that's scary.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that we can look at that's also scary, and this was run, by the way, I tell you, as a scenario, not as a real event, but a scenario that the military ran involved drones.
Okay.
So here's the military running this drone, hypothetically, and the drone is targeted to wipe out anti-aircraft batteries.
Okay.
So the drone goes up and it flies around and it says, "I spotted an anti-aircraft battery at X place."
Okay.
And the controller, sitting in the control room, says, "Do not destroy that battery."
Okay. Because the controller knows something about that particular aircraft
That's a
battery.
battery that's on our side.
That's the good guys. Okay.
The good guys, okay? But we have programmed the drone to say, you get points every time you destroy a battery.
This sounds like a video game, Ralph.
It does. So the drone's up there, and the controller says, "Don't destroy this one. Don't destroy this one. Yeah, do destroy that one. Do destroy the next one, but not this one." And the drone control in the machine, in the drone, gets a little ticked off and says, "I could have much more points if you'd let me destroy every battery." So, what does it do?
What
It
does it?
destroys the controller.
That was on they talked about that. Is that real?
That's one of the scenarios
Oh,
that has been run.
Okay.
So, you say, well, wait a minute. That's not an ethical move. That's not something we want. But if the overriding goal for the drone
It's to get points.
is to get points,
Just like my grandsons on Minecraft. They want to get rocks or points or something or other, and then.
yeah,
Okay, so you mentioned ethics, and we're going to be talking about ethical concerns at some point in time in the future. But with robots, it used to be that the programmer would program them to do no harm, right? To do no harm to human beings.
right.
Yeah. This seems to be kind of coming to an end
Well, it might be coming to an end,
with AI.
with AI, and because the problem with AI is that we don't know enough about how AI makes its decisions.
Yeah.
So, do we decide to end the drone controller and get all the points you can? Well, that's one possible outcome. Do we decide that some aircraft batteries signal friend, and I shouldn't destroy them, but everything else is fair game?
Right.
Well,
How do we program these things?
how do we program these things? And if we program them and the AI reaches singularity and it becomes independent, does it override this?
We're back to HAL, the Space Odyssey 2001, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know, Jim. You asked me whether I I thought this was realistic, whether it was conspiracy theory marched too far. What was my take on it? And the answer is, I really don't know, except I think it's scary, and we have to somehow or other assert human control over our devices.
Yeah, and
And I don't know how we do that.
we should give our listeners not necessarily a spoiler alert, but in the vlog, there are two characters. There's the narrator, who does a really good job, but his sidekick is a fish, a talking fish, who's the
Okay.
foil. It kind of reminds me of the day when Seymour Seagull was our foil. Remember that, Ralph?
I remember Seymour very well.
Yeah, we should have brought Seymour into our podcasts right at the beginning.
We could have.
Yeah, we would be cutting edge, just like this guy too, and have 2 million listeners instead of only 25,000 listeners. Anyhow, so don't get freaked out by the talking fish, because the talking fish does make a really good point. When we were talking about a few minutes ago, we were talking about ethical concerns. Now, who programs the AI to act ethically? And so the narrator said, well, human beings would be able to do that. And the fish says, oh, then we're screwed.
Yeah, because human beings are notorious for behaving in unethical ways.
Right. So what we'd encourage you to do is to click on the link below. You know, we don't want to send anybody to bed scared like Orson Welles did with War of the Worlds. You know, that's not our goal. But our goal is to get you, our listeners, to think about things, and in this case, think about the cognition of the AI, and then have a discussion with people around you. If there are 2 million people who have listened to this, that means there are still, what, 8 billion people who have not heard anything, about it. And
Yeah,
they could be impacted.
And the other thing is, if we even confine ourselves to just the United States, that's still 335 million people who do have probably access to computers, at least cell phones, and could watch it and could maybe encourage.
At least have the discussion, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm really glad I went to Mackinac Island, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to be with my daughter for a good chunk of time, and I'm really glad that she turned me on to this. I don't spend a lot of time with YouTube channels, but I probably will look at this guy again.
Yeah, and I mean, how often do you have the opportunity to hear a talking fish?
There you go. Talking fish, eh, Ralph?
Talking fish.
Okay.
And we want our listeners to remember to keep
Keep your stick on the ice,
because we're all in this together.